So hello, everyone. I'm Rita McGrath. You probably knew that. And with me today is just incredibly famous management guru, author, advisor to CEOs and boards, and friend and all-around super brilliant person, Charan. Who's beaming in to visit us from Texas. While people are getting into the webinar and getting themselves settled, a few housekeeping things. This is being recorded, so please don't say anything you do not want the Washington Post or your grandmother to see or hear. So just be a little bit mindful of that. We don't generally use the raise hand function because I don't always know who's in the webinar, but please do put comments and questions in the chat. I'll try to catch them as we go. And those that we don't get live, we'll copy and follow up on later on. Okay, so without further ado, welcome Ram. So Ram is the author of 27 books that I could count anyway. And his most recent book is called Rethinking Competitive Advantage. And as I was reading it, a lot of the themes in the book were really resonating to me. So we'll definitely get to the book in a bit. But I thought for those people that don't know you, Ram, perhaps a little bit of your backstory, because it's unusual and interesting and very engaging, actually. So maybe start there.
Okay. First, I'm honored to be there with you, Rita. It's a great honor having known you for so long and learned from you. You've been a prolific writer and communicator and advisor yourself. My story is very simple, is that I began to work in my father's and brother's shoe shop at the age of 10. That's where I learned the basics of business model. We never called it a business model. That's where we learned that you learn a business by managing cash. Then I went to the engineering college in India, which was at the time they called MIT of India, 4 years. And then I went to Australia, 4 years, worked full time, what I call made an honest living. And from there, I went to Harvard Business School, master's degree, doctoral degree, taught on the faculty for 6 years, went to Northwestern for 3 years, then 2 years, tenured at BU. And then the demand from outside became so much that I just began to feel that's not right. And so I left academics in 1977. And since then, I've been on the journey of learning, working with the practitioners. My mission has been practitioners. I don't do any theories, but I observe things and put some items together. So that's how these books are coming.
That's great. And you were telling me a story about your first book, which I think is a really interesting story.
So I should tell you that since I had decided not to write any books, and my academic guys kept saying, write the books, write the articles. So I wrote the first article for Fortune's front cover, Why CEOs Fail. And that was accepted in less than 3 minutes. Less than 3 minutes.
Wow.
And that made the front cover. Then I wrote many of those on the Harvard Business Review front cover. The story of the book is I was teaching at Ford. And at the end of the class, about 15 minutes before, the CEO walked in. Well, you know what happens when the CEO walked in, the class went kaput, no more talk. Class finished, and he came to me and he said, Ram, I want this book. I said, sir, what book? He said, what you were teaching? I said, sir, I don't write books. So he called his HR person, David Murphy. He said, David, get him to do the book, give him whatever he wants, and walked away. Then I wrote this book. It's now 1 million copies, what the CEO wants you to know. It's about how to make money by a street vendor, and I'm linking that how Jack Welch made money, link the two together. And then a publisher came in the next board meeting, and he saw my teaching, not the board meeting, teaching seminar. He said, I don't need a proposal, I buy this book right now. And that's how that book got done. And then I began to write the book on boards. That was my doctoral degree in corporate governance at Harvard Business School. And that became basically a reference book for the boards, where I suggested that every company should have an executive session. And I began to get flack from my clients about, what are you suggesting? We should never have a board session without the CEO present. Now, this is a requirement.
Yeah. Well, I think you saw early on the perils of, what can happen when leaders get so convinced of their own invincibility that they don't pick up the weak signals, and
Right.
that's a big theme. I mean, that's a big theme in this book, the new book, which
Yeah.
just to give you a little show there on
Thank
the
you.
cover.
Mm.
New rules for the digital age, and I think you make a very strong distinction between the CEOs that get it, that are paying attention,
Yes.
that are looking around, and
Yeah.
the ones that just are just acting as though nothing's changed in the world.
Exactly. So, really, the major change that everybody wants to really pick it up, and that is, we have been before the digital game, mass market, mass production, mass advertising. The advent of Jeff Bezos taking the 100-year-old technology of algorithms, applying large scale to service each customer individually, cannot be done for 100 million customers without algorithms. And be able to be maniacal about faster, cheaper, better, more convenient, last mile.
Mm-hmm.
That is a huge shift. And that huge shift has required a new way to design a business model that many have not yet caught up. So this book lays that out. So I just read a paper by Lena Khan. She is the Yale graduate who has been retained by the Judiciary Committee of the United States. And she declares that Amazon does not make money. In fact, losing it has been predator. Now, this is just plain down dead wrong. Amazon is one of the most, if not the 5-6 companies on the planet that has the best performance in terms of making money, but it is done differently. So I've taken CEOs through, Rita, and they tell me, Ram, it's not making money. I said, no, sir. So I take, as you know, my habit flip charts. I take them, rearrange the numbers of the P&L and balance sheet and show them exact numbers, why it is on the planet financially the most high-performing company among the 4 or 5, like the Apples and so on. So people have not caught on to it yet.
So what, if you had to sort of lay out the world we were in and the world we are in, you talk about the recipe for the new rules of competition, you call it. So personalized experience, algorithms, the notion of ecosystem competition, which I think is so powerful. Increasing returns, the social engine, and leaders really breaking through obstacles that create the change others have to respond to. I mean, each one of those is a real mindset shift that I think very powerfully informs what CEOs need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I think, Rita, is that when we had these various models in 70s and 80s, 5-force analysis, strategic intent, they were good for their time. Core competence, they were good for their time. They did not have this speed of change the way we have it. And they did not have that you want to serve each customer individually, personalization. And that cannot be done without the use of algorithms, cheap computing power, and the data and its continuous analytic usage. Now, what has changed more than we didn't have, that it's not you against a direct competitor. It's not you against an indirect competitor. It is now cutting across many industries and creating multiple partners and then competing with a similar company that has multiple partners. And their data is now processed through the algorithms, through machine learning. And now you're competing with that customer's total need, database analysis, and the last mile. That is a totally new way. Walmart is picking it up. Target is picking it up. They're coming to the party. What people have not realized, a Walmart built Amazon. A Target built Amazon. A Barnes and Noble built Amazon. A Disney built Netflix. They gave the right things to these upstarts without realizing that these new digital giants have a different way of making money. So there is a story I was told. Rita, you and I have both gone to Microsoft Summit. Remember that?
Oh, yes. Oh, that's
Microsoft.
right. Of course. Yes, yes, yes. For years.
Two of us used to go there and we presented our things. So you may want to elaborate a little bit that after the morning session, we used to go into small rooms.
Mhm.
Remember that?
Mhm.
And there will be 10, 15 CEOs and somebody will chair. You chaired one, I chaired one, and there will be a topic. So I was told by a CEO president that in one session in 1998, there were people like Jack Welch and Bill Gates and Eisner of Disney.
Mhm.
And Jeff Bezos was making this presentation about his company. And these people lashed on him. The phrase was used to me, lashed on him. You will never survive. It will never work for you. And Jeff kept pleasing. My business model is different. That goes to show the mindset
Mhm.
that must change.
Well, and if you think about the early days of Amazon, they did have to make a couple of pivots early on. Like one of the big things that I think they learned the hard way was initially they didn't want to have warehouses. They saw themselves purely as intermediaries. And then that proved to give problems when it came time to serving the customers well. And that's when, they had to
Absolutely.
make that.
One of the things I remind everybody, don't forget, he started as a very small company. He didn't start a large company. He sat on his knees and did the cardboards. And he recruited one of my students, Jeff Wilkie, from Varsity. I had him in the class, and Varsity told me he's high potential. And publicly, Jeff Wilkie has acknowledged Varsity as one of the key figures who influenced him.
Interesting.
So
for those who don't know who Larry Bossidy is, so let me just take a minute and fill that in.
Yeah.
So Larry Bossidy was, if Jack Welch hadn't been the guy soaking up all the oxygen, it would have been Larry Bossidy back in the day, because he was one of the first CEOs to really try to make a methodology out of how he ran the company. And he wrote this terrific book called Execution, which I use to this day. And there's some marvelous things in that book about how you evaluate performance, for example. I mean, it's really simple stuff, but people just don't do it. And so Larry Bossidy would have been, at the time, really regarded as one of the best CEOs in the day. Yeah. He was the CEO of Honeywell.
Yeah. And you've done many, many times, I'm just repeating here, simplest things are the hardest things. People ignore them.
Mm-hmm.
And until you and I and people like us bring the more complex things to actionable level, it won't work. When they become actionable level, they become common sense, they become obvious, they become simple.
Mm-hmm.
The harder part is to go from 100,000 feet to 100 feet.
Yeah. And then make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about that I think it was July of 1995, or around there anyway, 1995, when Bezos ships the first book and gets paid for it. Yeah. And at the time, there was a reporter working for Fortune who laid it all out. E-commerce, digital, I mean, the whole vision, right? Literally, like, what's happened since. And everybody ignored it at first. Then they went nuts over it. So then we had the whole dotcom craziness. Then it crashed. Then everybody said, see, that internet was a flash in the pan, never going to work. Let's go back.
And the stock price went to hell.
Right? And everybody went back to business as normal. And then there were a few survivors, so Amazon was one, eBay was one, a few of these really born digital firms that made it through. And then throughout the rest of the O's, I guess you'd say, they started building the infrastructure on which the kind of things you're talking about in your book now rest on. And I just think that's fascinating that there was this recognition something big was happening among a few people, the dismissal that anything big was happening among a lot of other people, and then eventually the thing happened. So how do you pick up those early mornings? I mean, do you have a preferred method for doing that?
Yeah, great question here. I want to mention one thing that I like everybody to understand. In the machine learning age, the investment you put in infrastructure, a great part is in what economists call intangibles, software, technologies, algorithms, and they get expensed They are, therefore, by expensing, you pay less tax.
Mhm.
At the same time, your EPS you measure conventionally are reduced.
Mhm.
So CAPEX becomes OPEX.
Right.
So if you say that EPS basis, you're not making money, I would like everybody in this audience to redo that. That is fallacious. GAAP accounting in the software age is the wrong one. It is cash per share.
Mhm.
And that's what Bezos laid that out. This is what is measured. This is how you allocate resources. Cash is cash unless there is a fraud. EPS is discretionary in many ways, and the game has changed. And this software helps you do scale up faster,
Right.
bigger, at increasing margins.
Mhm.
And so this is a major change, and people have not yet caught up,
Mhm.
including many CEOs that I've come to know them. So I like the audience to take the balance sheet and P&L of Amazon and extract out of it 50 billion plus a year he invests in technology and put that as a capital expenditure, then do the GAAP accounting. This is one of the most profitable companies.
Mhm.
So I wrote that to Lena Khan. She's Judiciary Committee. She declared this is unprofitable, and I just had to write to her and say, this is just not so.
That is fascinating. That is such an interesting analysis. And you're absolutely right. And what I find, I mean, Clayton Christensen said this years ago. He said, that accounting measures are not the same as competitive measures. And you make a big mistake as a leader when you mix them up.
Very insightful, Rita, very insightful.
Yes.
They can't, they're not trained.
No, well, yeah. And what we do train, and I mean, I'm guilty of this, right? I work at a business school. I mean, we train people to look at things that there's a thing called capital and there's a thing called expenses. And fun things like software fall in the expense side of the house. But you're absolutely right. The infrastructure of the digital age, the capital of the digital age is this software services, machine learning layer.
Exactly.
Really interesting.
You see, one thing about Amazon and Adobe and Apple and 5, 6 of others, Amazon generates gross cash. The terminology he has used and Satya Nadella is using, gross cash margin in dollars. In 2020, it generated close to $150 billion. This is hard cash. Now, what you do with it, he invests to get 30% growth. So it expenses, and the EPS shows very meager. There is no enterprise except people like Apple who generate gross cash of 150 billion a year. It's hard cash. People need to learn to manage a business on a cash basis, just like a street vendor and a corner grocery store guy does it. And that's in my book, What the CEO Wants You to Know.
I remember that chapter. I remember it so well. And you were talking about, inventory in and inventory out, and the number of times you repeat that process, the better things get. What I loved about that was it made it so simple that people could really grasp the core concepts very, very readily. That was just great. So let's talk a little bit about the way that you get senior teams to accept the fact that things have to change. So I'll tell a little story on you that I heard once, and I'd love you to elaborate on it. But I was told once that you came into a room full of executives, big global company, and presented them with an extremely worrying newspaper story about a dramatic problem, a crisis that had happened in their business. And, you weren't going to do the prepared agenda. They were going to buckle right down and see what they were going to do about this crisis. And then some productive hours later, it was revealed the crisis was not yet upon them, but it could be seen to be coming. And they all kind of went, oh my God, thank goodness we did that. So, I mean, most senior leaders in my experience take some convincing that there's anything at all that needs to change, or that they need to really redirect their own attention to something that's different. And I see we've got Rick Goings here. So hi, Rick. Great that you can join us. I'm a huge fan of Rick's as well. And apparently he is of you. So that's great. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Rita, could just simply rephrase this for me. I missed part of it, the bandwidth.
So how do you get senior leaders to
Yeah.
realize when they need to move? Because
Okay.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
inertia there, right? There's a lot of
Yeah. Okay.
keeping
Now,
the wheels turning, you know?
yeah. I see one of the things is that I don't market myself. Nothing. So I have people that I work with, and usually I would get a call.
Mm.
People like you, others give my word, give their word for me. So that's a very important part when Rita calls somebody. And it's a big endorsement, you know. And we have done that before. And so then what happens is that when I talk with them, you have to do some homework, you know. You don't walk in without the homework. You don't waste their time, you know. So I need to find out what is their real set of issues. I have one coming to me this afternoon to Dallas from somewhere for 4 hours. Talked to him on the phone for half an hour, and he decided to come with his two people together.
Mm.
So I need to learn, the business need to learn what are the set of issues there are. And then I also tell them that I may not be the right person. I'm not going to waste your time. You're going to find out sooner or later.
Right.
And so then I begin to show them, but it has to be seen that is practical. It has to be seen they can see the outcome.
Mhm.
And then you got to see that most of the ideas go beyond technical answers.
Mhm.
They involve people answers. And the buzzword is social answers. So you work with that. And that's how you show them. So for example, in digitization today, digitization means use of AI and algorithms and machine learning. So I've now figured out, and I'm doing it actively, that I can sit with the CEO and his CTO, CDO, CFO, that if they invest 10 weeks, use an outside vendor, less than $300,000, you can see some real outcome. I'll give you an example. I've got 50 cases like that today. 50. I'll give you one example.
Mhm.
There is a very big company in Japan in retail. The chairman personally called me on the phone. Usually you go, you know, through interpreters and everybody. He did have an interpreter. And he says, I need help. I have this company in XYZ country, my company, and that it's clogged and that the inventory is not moving. Can you help? So I called one vendor. Within a week, I got his team and the client's team together. In 9 weeks, it got fixed, less than $300,000. The stock moved, data collected, done.
Hmm.
You don't need a comprehensive, full thing to do with zillion dollars. So when I'm able to show for a specific company,
Mhm.
a specific issue, and they can see that $300,000 is not going to kill the company, and they can see a real outcome,
Mhm.
they're willing to go with it.
Mhm. Mhm. But they have to feel the pain first.
Or I have to show them.
You have to
Because
show.
often when you're talking to them, they may not be putting the finger on.
Mhm.
What I bring is the outside view.
Mhm.
And I've known something usually about customer and competition. And say, what about this? So, oh, yes. Or no, you're wrong. It won't work.
Mhm.
And so I say, okay, what is it? Because I'm there not to sell any tools. I'm not one of those that say, I have a solution. What's your problem?
Right.
I don't do that.
No, no. So what are some of the sort of common themes you see when you talk to senior leaders and boards?
Yeah. The common themes are on the board level. And let me go from 100,000 feet to, to the 100 feet. There are so many issues. And so at the board level, one issue has never changed and will not change. Do you have the right CEO?
Mm-hmm.
And 2nd, alignment of the board with the CEO. 3rd, alignment of the board with the CFO. 4th, alignment of the board with the CTO. 5th, alignment of the board with the CDO. 6th, alignment of the board with the CFO. 7th, alignment of the board with the CTO. 8th, alignment of the board with the CFO. 9th, alignment of the board with the COO. 10th, alignment of the board with the COO. 11th, alignment of the board with the CTO. 12th, alignment of the board with the COO. 13th, alignment of the board with the CFO. 14th, alignment of the board with the COO. 15th, alignment of the board with the CTO. 16th, alignment of the board with the CFO. 17th, alignment of the board with the COO. 18th, alignment of the board with the CTO. 19th, alignment of the board with the CFO. 20th, alignment of the board with the COO. 21st, alignment of the board with the CFO. 22nd, alignment of the board with the CTO. 23 the right priorities. And third is now you hear about purpose, you hear about diversity, you hear about GHG and emissions. And so crystallizing where to focus and how to allocate capital. At the same time, activist shareholder can knock on the wood anytime.
Mhm.
So the board needs to add value and see what are the priority issues and capital allocation. But the most important, CEO and his or her team. That remains at the board level. There's a cybersecurity issue, all of them, but they can't do everything.
No.
Focus and have a trajectory.
Mhm.
The second thing, I just wrote an article with the lead author from former chairman of Vanguard and vice chairman of Korn Ferry about the role of investor relations officers must change. It has changed.
Oh, I'd love to get into that.
This is real. And so this article just come out in Harvard Business Review in the blog area. How it should change, why it should change. And the key thing in that change is that this person is more than a relay of information.
Mhm.
He or she needs to find the right investors. He or she needs to learn the operating side of the business. And you change this person every 3-4 years to go to other jobs. In the Indian companies, I am now putting the children of the founders, first job, investor relations. Most of them are MBAs from somewhere, very articulate. It's not that I go and do the bottom thing. No, you got to learn. You're a public company. You got to learn how to work with the investors. And you have to learn details. The crux comes when you are missing the quarterly earnings. What happens to your credibility? What do you do? Credibility, once gone, is almost impossible to recover.
Mhm. Now, do you
With the
think? But
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
interested. Let's dig into that for a minute because I hear, you get these multiple stories. So you'll have the CEOs who say, "I can't possibly invest in innovation. I can't possibly invest in name issue of choice ESG or diversity or whatever because I'm getting really close to the quarter and I can't be thinking about the long term." And yet, when I look at the people, particularly people that have endorsed your book, and I'm thinking here of David Cody, for example, of Honeywell. I mean, unbelievable 17-year journey of dragging that company into the future sort of by its hairs. And yet they do that. They do that. This seemingly reality defying thing.
So Rita, I've been with him starting from the job he got with Boston.
Is that right?
Or from very day. I was instrumental in all those things.
Uh-huh.
This is a leader where only recently we're singing his praises. But he was quiet, building it, doing it, and had the rhythm to it. I just wrote an article about him in Chief Executive Magazine because I know him from very early days, before he even became CEO of Honeywell. And people can learn from that, that you don't have to be rambunctious. You select priorities. It's highly disciplined on priorities. You got others to have the priorities. See, going from vision to strategy to priorities, the rubber hits the road on priorities and follow through on the execution. 80% of the game is execution. And he is par excellence.
He's very, very good. But let's come back to this question of the short term versus the, I can't possibly make that investment because fill in excuse du jour. I mean, I gather you're not very sympathetic to that view, but what do you advise people who present that problem to you?
Yeah, see, I'm inside these companies sometimes 10 years. My longest has been 30 years.
Wow.
One has been 40 years, same company throughout.
Wow.
So you get to know. So I have one Chinese company where I'm inside totally, budgets and everything. I show that the issue is first, if you promise to deliver some quarter and you fail, you need to know why. Is it an aberration or is it a competitive issue? That's very important. Aberration, we will be okay. Competitive issue, or a failure of a strategic side of it, you got to own it. Number two is that we know if you don't invest today to build tomorrow, your short term will become shorter.
Right. Absolutely.
It does. The evidence is there. So now what I designed for clients the following. On your budget, I want a separate line for investment growth. Separate set of initiatives, separate reviews, and separate incentive. And in my Game Changer book with Ellen Lefley of P&G, we showed that up to the proof of concept, you can have 9 out of 10 failures. You won't cringe. But once the proof of concept is established, you're making business decisions, not innovation decisions. That's where the business risks are and heavy investments. And the board needs to review minimum twice a year the growth projects. The idea that we can't do that is wrong, because I'm able to show that. Because I show them that the investments we are making, how they directly relate to revenue growth and margin growth, and be prepared to have the failure experiments. So for Amazon, I have a list of 18 mega failures.
And what are they? What's on your list?
Well, you know that they're publicly known, like the Fire thing.
Fire phone, right? That would be right up at the top of my list. They made 3 major attempts to get into third-party selling before they figured it out.
So this will happen. I have clients, they're doing it now. I'm saying the other part is this short-term annual bonus incentive, and that needs to change. So I'm on the board of a company, and on this board, I've said you're giving the board members $100,000 in cash, $150,000 in equity. I said, put the whole thing in equity. You see the behavior change. So I have another company where I have got them to eliminate the annual bonus altogether. We give enough as a fixed salary, but you're getting the stock. And it's not available to be vested before 3 years. It's a very similar one that Amazon does. He has 4 years. So the whole behavior changes. And we said, it's okay if you missed 1 quarter, it's okay, because the traders will come back, because more than 50% of this stock is owned by 20 institutions in the world.
Right.
They're not getting out. They can't get out.
No.
And then we want the investor relations guy to find other long-term investors who understand that. Warren Buffett used to say that, find your own investors.
Right. That's very wise. That's very wise. So the counsel to the CEO is that they really need to be thinking beyond, just how to turn the crank another quarter. Do you think that's changing from the board perspective? I mean, do you think that that we're starting to get smarter about who we put in those roles?
So, Rita, in the book, I took the time. It took me 6 months to put 1 chapter called 10X. This is exactly, I'm getting the CEOs to work with me to think 10 years out, and your market size to be 10 years larger than it is today.
Right.
But the market size is not in dollars. It is in the need of the customer. Then I'm working backwards from them, what you do now. Most of the expenditure for that is people expenditure. It's not capital expenditure. So you got idea that 10 years later, we will have the application of, let us say, solid state battery, which is happening now. So if you are a company that is going to use the batteries, there are many, they will. So I want a team of 3 people, full-time, and say, and you are a $10 billion, I have one, by the way, this one, $10 billion company. I want three guys, unlimited travel, meeting unlimited scientists. They're going to be minimum 5 years with us. They will get a lump sum. Nail all that down on battery, cost curves, uses, markets. We know in 10 years, that solid state is going to succeed or something else will going to succeed because the customer wants the convenience.
Yeah.
That is long term.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, if a $10 billion company can't budget 3 people, that's a management problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So Rick's telling us to remember to organize our senior leadership teams as revenue generation teams. And I have a feeling there's a backstory there, maybe from his days at Avon.
Yeah. So they should read this chapter 10x, 100x, 1000x.
Mm-hmm.
It's real because it's working. I'm working with the clients and showing
Well,
them.
in the book, you talk about the market size of Amazon and how much opportunity they have.
And that's true. I have just written a piece for op-ed that there is no legal way they can show they're dominant.
Really?
I taught antitrust at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
There is no legal way
Mm-hmm.
they can show they are dominant.
Mm-hmm.
Example, they now cover 10, 15, 20 industries from which they draw.
Mm-hmm.
America alone, consumption today of those needs of the customer is close to minimum $4 trillion. This is existing. This is no potential.
Mm-hmm.
And now their sales, excluding AWS, is roughly 300 billion.
Mm.
So it's about a 7.5% market share.
So there's a lot of room there.
A lot of room to go. So they cannot prove it's dominant. Now, they have potential power to do things. But the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act,
Mm-hmm.
cannot be applied here.
Yeah.
Something has to be invented.
It'll have to be a new regulatory regime.
The new stuff.
Yeah. So you've been in very exalted levels in many, many organizations, different kinds of organizations for many years. As you reflect on it, are there major themes that you'd like people to really take away from all that work and all that observation? I mean, I can name some of the themes of yours that have just struck me. I loved Game Changer. And for those of you that don't know, this wonderful book that Ron co-authored with A.G. Lafley about Procter & Gamble, there's literally a chapter in the book devoted to failures. And Lafley has laid out, like in black and white, all the things they tried that didn't go right, what the problem was. So, too early for the market, not enough big demand, didn't solve a real problem. And he lays them all out in the book, which I thought was a remarkable managerial courage.
Very clear. So, Rita, here are some lessons, and I should say tools that could be helpful because no company, 2 companies are the same. But tool number 1, you're only as good as 2% of the people who have 98% of the impact. Compare that with the competition and compare how they create new value. Usually about 50 people, 60 people. They are not necessarily leaders. They're experts. They're doers. They're individual contributors as well. There are teams. You need to learn how to find those 2. You need to learn why they create 98%. It's a concept. Number 2 is you got to simplify the organization. There are organizations that have 10 layers today, large ones.
Wow.
They won't survive.
Mm-hmm.
Speed. You got to think to get to 4.
4 layers.
I have those now. I've done it.
I know a lot of CEOs who'd be pretty freaked out by that.
Yeah. So I there are tools to do that. Take that with you. If you don't have this speed, you will die. The speed has to go with quality, quality of decision making. Number 3 is the one that most people will have negative reaction. And Rita, I would love to have your opposite viewpoint. That's what we are here for.
Sure.
95% plus of the CEOs, strategic planners, CFOs are saying, this is our core competence, build on it. World has changed, you work backwards. What's the opportunity? What core competence we need? Which part of the core competence is irrelevant? What new one we need to have?
Mm-hmm.
Why companies die? Many reasons. One of them is their core competence has become obsolete.
Mhm.
And the last one, double the experimentation, double the successful innovation. And that is people issue. Because you double that experimentation for proof of concept. After that, it's a business decision.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that distinction.
It's in my Game Changer book. I lay out very specific steps how to do that. And I can show in that book, I've shown it. You can fail 9 times out of 10 and you will not regret it.
Yeah, those are great lessons to think about. So let's talk about the core competence thing for a minute, because, we went through the very famous article, The Core Competence of the Corporation. And I think what people forget is every idea in strategy is a response to some other idea, right? And the other idea that it was in response to was there was a big movement, I want to say in the 80s, where everything should be broken down to the SBU level. Remember that? So everybody should have strategic business units. And the strategic business unit should have everything. It should have its own finance. It should have its own computers. It should have its own thing, because they were going to be run like little entrepreneurial businesses. And that was very fashionable for a while. And then CK and many other people came along and said, well, actually, no, that there's something to being a large established company where you have capabilities that cut across the strategic business units. And now you want to leverage those. And that came to be called the core competence of the corporation. And everybody, and there was this weird 10-year period where everybody was running around looking for the magic sauce that was their core competence. And now I think we're almost, at the other end of the spectrum, where people are saying, well, everything you used to do is no longer worthwhile and we need to change it all, And so I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. And it really, to me, I've always looked at it as, how are you anchoring your company, right? And I think there's some companies that are, like Amazon would be a case in point, that are really anchored on the customer. Like, if you have to make a choice at the end of the day, it's the thing that's better for the customer they'll go for. I do think other companies are anchored on capabilities or technologies. And, I might use Corning as an example there, where, they really do think long-term. They think we need to be 10 years ahead of our customers. So to me, it's this kind of give and take a bit.
Yeah, I think, Rita, you just said it. Start, Mr. CEO, Miss CEO,
Mm-hmm.
invest a couple of days a month minimum
Mm-hmm.
with a fresh sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Work backwards from the end user, even though you're B2B.
Yeah.
So I have a company that is very crucial for tech, people like Apple's. So I have gotten them to start with the end consumer, even
Mm-hmm.
though they don't sell to end consumer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Work backwards. And then you have people in the chain between this company and the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're saying, okay, the technology change is very, very high speed. So guess where am I? I heard for 1 full hour Tim Cook the other day.
Uh-huh.
I'd known it before because I had coached 1 or 2 directors of Apple
Mm-hmm.
for a long time. They do not have P&L centers.
Mm-hmm.
0. And there is a reason. And they get experts in the positions to lead experts. And they put people in those positions who can take risk on technology.
Because they have judgment. They talk about this at Corning. They talk about deep expertise and judgment.
You got it.
Not something you can solve for in a spreadsheet.
Yeah. And Rita, they only have 1 P&L. One only.
When you think about it.
Put it,
Yeah.
and Tim Cook is continuing. I totally support that.
Mm-hmm.
In the technology companies I'm in, I'm moving that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it is one P&L, right?
But our people who have grown through P&L centers have great difficulty imagining it, to say the least, of accomplishing it.
Right.
And the board has a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, what I call this the resource hostage problem, which is, you have these powerful people who have resources that they think they own, and they're not willing to yield them for your team of 3 people to go figure out batteries or whatever it is that you need to do to really think about the future. And I find that a pretty catastrophic problem that somebody, the board or senior leadership, needs to break through.
Yeah. And Rita, before I forget, and I think we said it before, if you're not building an ecosystem and the data, you have less chances to be more successful companies.
Right. Yeah. I find that what I'm seeing, and I think your book reflects this as well, is a lot of times the value is actually going from products and services to these transactions, to interactions and transactions.
Exactly. Engagement.
Yeah. And so, you can't sell a hammer these days without somebody saying, oh, I bought this hammer and then left it out in the sun and the handle melted. Well, my goodness, now you got a hammer that's a digital product. So I know there's a number of people curious about how do you go from 10 layers to 4?
Sorry, Rita, last
part. How do you go from 10 layers to 4 layers?
Oh, yeah. No, the way we have done it first is that there are conditions. Number 1, you have to have single source of truth, data. Second, it has to be transparent. Third, I'm on a board of a company. It's in the early stages. So we figured out a way of the monitoring system that is transparent. So people can draw data, cut across lines, make decisions. In another situation, we have to take, I began to do experimentation first. And the lady who does it created 2 pilots. They were very successful over a 2-year period. People came to her and said, why not us? So they organized into 187 teams.
Oh, wow.
We're using algorithms. Indian gentlemen develop all those apps, trackers and all that. And then once this got cut off, you know what I mean? The turnkey began to move. They made a very big change in the industry. They offered a 0 price product. Market share is increasing like hell all the way because the algorithms are managing it. So this person is the CEO, and there are people reporting 13 to her. And then there are another 13, and there are 187 teams. Amazon has more teams. So these teams are almost total sufficient. They draw what they need to draw, very clearly linked. They're all customer based. I shouldn't say almost, because there are other things going on there. So we now have how to do it. It works. It shows results. Costs have gone down. But more importantly, this has released the energy of the people to exercise their creativity and imagination.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is the example of Netflix. And I happen to find Netflix fascinating, as many people do. And I was talking to some of the people that designed their people system, and they talk about talent density and pushing decision making, as far down as they possibly can, and letting experimentation be driven by the people that are the experts, right? So they're really relying on those value creators.
Absolutely.
To do that. Yeah.
The reason I wrote Netflix to show that the competition has changed as a broader concept. And that is when Mike Porter wrote the competitive analysis. In that one, we never included that the funding guys altering the competition.
Can you say more about
Netflix,
that? More about
yeah.
That.
See, Netflix is being funded by outsiders. If you stop that funded, Netflix couldn't compete. So we see Masasan funding. So we got Airbnb, we got Uber. So we got Flipkart in India.
Mm-hmm.
That the funders like Tiger,
Mm-hmm.
sticking with the company 5, 10, whatever the years, with large amount of money.
Oh, yeah.
So they're altering the competitive pattern.
Yes.
We didn't have that.
No. Well, this is something that I've been watching a lot, which is, and I mean, the latest is SPACs, like so much money, much money chasing
so the competition analysis includes the funders who will fund your cash needs. And somebody else who's very good can't get the cash. You alter the competitive pattern.
That's right. That's exactly right.
That's new.
Yeah. Well, I used to joke about teaching entrepreneurship 101.
Yeah.
How kind of depressing it is when somebody can write a slick pitch and somebody's throwing $30 million at them and you're thinking, that's not even a business.
There you go.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's a big thing.
One of the questions on a lot of people's minds these days is the agenda around diversity, equity, inclusion. It's become a real topic. We know that firms that are more inclusive do better. I know you've personally worked with any number of really high-powered women in particular. How do you see that agenda unfolding? Do you think it's kind of a fad, or do you think it's here to stay?
Yeah, I tell you, I'm on 7 boards across the globe. Chinese, Indians, Brazilians, Americans, Canadians. Now, all my life, I've been working with women. I've been coaching some, as I mentioned, some on very big boards.
Yeah.
Their CEOs on the boards are very short-sighted not to have diversity. As I work with them, I said, no. So I had a black lady, about 20 years ago. She was 4 levels below the CEO. I was teaching, and I recognized her talent. This is 25 years ago. So I took her to a very large company CEO and CHRO. I said, you need to keep an eye on her. She could be a board material. The CHRO liked her. CEO I had a good credibility with them. And they said, she's too young. So one day I called Larry Bassity and I said, you have to look at this girl. He did, and he gave her a job. She ran a $2 billion company. She went on the board of Raytheon, on the board of Harman. Find these people. They are there. Look at the raw talent. So diversity, I'm saying, you're not doing somebody a favor, do yourself a favor.
Right.
Get raw talent.
Right. That's a great philosophy. I absolutely love that. So I want to be mindful of your time. I mean, there's a lot of interest in sort of how do you see leadership changing? Do you see, you've seen several eras now of leaders kind of taking the reins and moving on. Do you see a difference now in the ones that are coming up?
I'm sorry, Rita, again.
Do you see a difference in the kinds of leaders that are getting some of these larger jobs?
Yeah. Rita, I tell everybody when I find a moment of relaxation, nobody would have hired Jeff Bezos. Nobody would have hired Steve Jobs, Kalanick, Bill Gates.
Jack Ma.
Why? These are business people. Many of the people coming through shown their leadership from bottom to up. Many of them talk strategy, but they're not business people. Business acumen is missing. So now you begin to see the slight tilt. People who have some expertise and have a business mind. And the algorithms are doing a lot of control function. Organizations got designed to create middle management for control function.
Well, you wrote about the leadership pipeline, which it really influenced my thinking, particularly with respect to executive education.
Yeah, I did.
You talk about leading yourself and being a leader of others and sort of moving.
Exactly.
Have you seen that being compressed now?
No, I've changed it. I have a Chinese client growing very fast, and I'm taking him from 6 passages to 3. Simply three.
Yeah.
Easier to manage.
Yeah.
But to do that, you need algorithms, you need data. Single source of truth, transparency.
That's fascinating. So that's
So I
something
have a
that has
2-hour
changed.
session with him every month,
Mhm.
and he's doing it.
Because I mean, I see that in executive development as well. People are being, you know, there used to be a lot of trainer jobs, like you'd go
Yeah.
run the Philippines or something for a couple of years and then you'd come back and whatever. And it was sort of, as you moved up the pipeline, you had these larger jobs. And I just think as companies are going to things like 4 layers of management, those jobs are gone. Those trainer jobs have disappeared.
Yeah, and also, Rita, we got to kill the word executive development.
Okay.
It's over. Leadership development. Leadership been taught for millennials.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different game.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do skill training now more than before. You got to learn how to convert knowledge and insight. You got to learn how to build ecosystems and teams. These come through practice. So one of the things I'm designing, that nothing will be taught except the following way. You got a group of people who want to learn a certain skill, certain ecosystem, certain leadership trait of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
You teach in 3 hours in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
You take a couple of hours for sports, recreation, whatnot. You practice that all afternoon. You take a test in the evening. Do some reading. You're out in 3 weeks.
Wow.
And you have to take a test every day. Pass, fail. You fail, take it again. Those who don't get it, they move. This is how the defense people do, army people do, Navy people do. The old ways are over. And I want the practical people to teach it, not me.
Mm-hmm. So you would bring people together, or do you do this virtually?
We can do both ways.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And
so
how would people?
You force to do daily evaluation,
Right.
daily absorption,
Right.
the things that matter.
Mm-hmm.
For example, some companies have to recruit a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to train the recruiters. This is built for them.
Mm-hmm. So there's all that. I love that. I love that idea. I think that's fascinating. Oh yeah, because I'm looking at the time. Is there any kind of parting thoughts? How do people learn more? I mean, that you have a fabulous website.
Yeah, I want you.
It's really worth reading. It's going to provoke your thoughts. It really is. It's a terrific book, and I didn't think the exact same things, but it's very well aligned with the way I'm looking at inflection points in the world as it goes digital.
So, Rita, I want people to take from me, the future is very bright. There's going to be $30 trillion of new economy. Large part will be digital. We should get our share of it. Go positive, find the right people, and learn how to use this 100-year-old algorithmic technology. The most important theorem of these algorithms was invented in 1763 by a priest that we use in Gallup poll. This is the one you need for prediction of anything you do. It's airtight. It has been embellished, improved quite a bit from here on. So let's go and build, first and foremost, your mindset on the end user. Work backwards and manage for cash, not gap accounting.
I love that. Ram Charan, what an absolute pleasure to reconnect with you. And it's been a while since we've spoken, and to hear how your thinking's evolved. I always learn something when we get to have a conversation. So thank you for making the time.